Hey there, everybody. Gonna get going quickly into it today because there's a lot on the agenda to talk about. So I'm going to take a quick sip and we're going to start. Apparently, a lot of people want to talk. What's happening, John? Let's get it going. Let's bring the fire, let's bring the thunder, and other elements, I suppose. Where's my, nope, wrong thing. Sup, Cal? How you doing? All right. Where's my stuff at? All right, this stuff will have to work. Okay. Let's start this thing off. Throw all your questions at me as we're doing the thing. Yeah, well, you'll see. I'll explain here in just a second how today is going to work. Welcome into the DNVR Rockies Podcast presented by Strava Craft Coffee. Remember to use that promo code DNVR20 and you'll get 20% off of the delicious CBD-infused, rich coffee that has absolutely changed my life. I believe that it has the possibility to change yours. I'm your host, Drew Kreisman. I'm the managing editor of DNVR Rockies. And on this episode, I'm diving head and shoulders, knees and toes, I suppose, back into this conversation about whether or not baseball will reopen. Just a couple of little things that I've seen here and there. Obviously, we don't have hard, fast news on this. We've got reports, we've got rumors, we've got players saying some things, different things like that I wanted to talk about, give some of my own thoughts on where we're at and how the Colorado Rockies are set to return if we are, going to kick off spring training here in just a couple of weeks. And then if I've got time, depending on how many questions there are, and I do encourage anyone who's here for the live to send in their questions on Periscope, Twitch, Twitter. Make sure you're following us on all of those places so that you can catch us for the live and participate in the conversation. But if we've got a little time at the end, I may do another brief profile on a player I think the Colorado Rockies could or should take with their first overall pick. Again, it's the 9th pick in the upcoming June 10th draft that we are going to have wall to wall. Probably too much draft coverage, to be honest with you, but that's what I'm aiming for. I'm basically trying to provide, I'm just going to say it. Here's my goal. Set your bar high, and if I don't match it, all of you can say, you didn't match it, you didn't get it, you didn't do it. I want to provide the best Rockies draft coverage that's ever existed. The most in-depth conversation about the entire organization, what they do in the draft, what they've done in drafts previous, and what they can do to better themselves as a team. That is our plan for the draft, and so we're going to have plenty of preamble leading up to it. But for now, let's get back into the conversation. Where are the owners? Where are the players? Are we going to have a season? If so, when is it going to start? And obviously, I hope everybody had a chance to read the article that I published this morning where I explained why I think pretty much everybody is right and everybody is wrong about these issues, that I think that there are people who you might consider on opposite sides of ideological trains. I'm not talking politics in terms of ideology here. I'm saying pro come back quickly, anti come back quickly, pro player, pro owner, whatever you may think about it. I think there are a lot of interesting conversations and arguments to be had on all sides of that, right? And I also think the more I look inside of there, the solutions become clearer. And I didn't really conclude in my piece today, so I'll probably do a follow-up. And Carl Seb saying here on, I think through the Periscope there, I want some kind of sports soon. And you know what? We all do. And that was kind of where I started with. The fans are right. And I maybe have not done my best job to give voice to that side of it, because I will say my ultimate position is wanting sports back is not enough to get them back. We have to do it right. That said, it should not be undersold what having sports back would mean to people. I've probably been guilty in the past of overselling the importance of sports. And I think we oftentimes get caught up in this really weird space of separating sports from important and serious things and saying, well, it's not life and death. And it's not. It's not more important than, big worldly events. But as all of you know, and as all of us know who follow along with it, that you don't just be alive to stay alive, right? That's a big conversation going on for a lot of us right now. And sports is one of the things that not only is something we fill up our lives with, but I think, and some people would view this negatively or think it is somehow sad, but to say that for some of us, sports helps give our lives meaning. And it certainly shouldn't be the only thing that gives your life meaning. That would be a negative, and that would be incredibly sad if sports are the only thing that give your life meaning. But to say it enriches us, it connects me to my father and to his father and to my mother and to her mother and to extended family. I've got cousins who I've barely met but are huge baseball fans, and I see their stuff on Facebook, and we have this connection through sports and through our love of the game that even though we don't really know each other well, and I haven't got to meet them. They're very young, and I hope to get to meet them as they grow up too. But there are so many ways, and I think that is the biggest one, is that connection, and I think that's what a lot of people are missing right now. And that's why I want to do a better job on this podcast of being a bit more proactive, because I will say this, I see a lot of hurdles to this thing. And I do think there is a scenario whereby baseball comes back. People are following the rules at first, but very quickly into it, people stop following the general guidelines, and enough people get sick that they risk a second outbreak and we have to shut it all down again. And that's even worse. And another thing that I wrote that I wanted to call some attention to here is these sort of long-term impacts of reopening too soon and then shutting it all the way down again on the league, and particularly on the trust of the players and the owners. And Patrick Lyon started to walk up toward this point, I think, on a recent podcast, and I was a little bit more focused on other issues, but I'd like to more directly highlight the relationship between what's happening right now, which of course, we weren't expecting 6 months ago that there was going to be this battle between the players and the owners, but we did know that there was a battle between the players and the owners looming. There have been accusations of late of even collusion between the owners to not sign the best players in baseball and to not sign them for the best number. So essentially, you've got an already tumultuous, fractured relationship between the players and the owners, and we're coming up on the need to negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement. And the players are trying to negotiate a new collective bargaining agreement, and whether or not they're going to put themselves in potential physical harm's way this season for less money than they were promised. And in order to do so, they've got to trust a man who as recently as this year, 2020, referred to the World Series championship as a piece of metal. Now, he rescinded those remarks, and I think understands why they were problematic. And while you do not conflate what happened with the Astros and that scandal with what's going on right now, again, real world versus sports world, real drama versus sports drama. However, you can start to reach conclusions about the judgment of the people in charge. And at no point during the Astros scandal, from the time that they launched I'm not going to use that word, a hollow investigation, Major League Baseball ran an investigation of the Houston Astros and closed it, finding no wrongdoing. Of course, we know there was wrongdoing. It wasn't until Mike Fiers came forward as a whistleblower and blew the whole thing open. And then we found all of a sudden a mountain of evidence that somehow Major League Baseball wasn't able to uncover. The people in charge of that investigation, the people in charge of saying, well, the Astros stole a World Series title, but it's just a piece of metal and no one really cares. And we're not going to ban anyone for life, even though we love banning people for life. And we're just going to pretend like it never happened. Those people, the people with that judgment who've made all of these decisions, are now the ones that we're trusting to properly handle potentially life and death situations. And so I understand why the players, not just for money reasons, are saying, I'm not sure this is the best idea. I've heard reports from different people that I trust saying completely different things. Some saying, the players and owners are coming closer together. Some saying there's no budging from the positions that they're on. The players aren't going to assume X amount of risk, and the owners aren't going to accept less than Y amount of profit. And if that's the case, we're probably not going to have a season. Now that I've said that, let me do the thing I was talking about earlier and focus more on the potential positive, because there is an answer here. Whether or not the players and owners and the people involved are willing to make it happen, there is an answer, and it's lied in there. And they're talking about now these deferred payments. And I think that's the answer. You've got to pay the players what you promised to pay them. It's almost as simple as that. And if it's legitimately the case that you don't have the cash on hand to do it now, we all know you're going to have the cash on hand to do it at some point. You will be able to, over the next couple of years, make that work. So deferred payments for the players, but they still get the money that they were guaranteed. And there has to be an extreme adherence to the rules and kind of a no-nonsense season-long, suspensions for anyone who's, and not for like spitting and stuff, but like if you go out to the club after the game and you get caught, you have to be suspended for the year. You can't go back out there. It's got to be that kind of stuff. Because if Major League Baseball fumbles this, it ruins it for everybody. And it goes beyond, your whatever your personal beliefs are about when this should happen or how extreme or less extreme we need to be, what the risks are. This is true. If baseball messes this up, it messes it up for everybody. And we may even be in a situation, and of course, this is the wrong podcast to be making this argument. People are going to say, how dare you? But it could even be a situation where, if we don't bring back baseball, then we can have football because enough time will have passed and we'll know the extent of whether there was a second wave and all of that. And hopefully even be on the other side of that. And then stuff can really go back to normal. But if there's I worry about it. But from a contract standpoint, there's a solution and it's on the table. There's been movement from what I understand. Maybe they're all sitting back, throwing back some Breck beer, especially out here drinking the Mile High Copper Lager. They probably ordered it from Davidson's. They got the 15-can sampler. It's delicious. They're drinking the Brecks. They're going, we can figure this out. And I think they've started to realize the point we were back on. People would really, really, really like for there to be sports. And ultimately what it does take, and this is part of why I'm frustrated, because it's very possible to bring it back. All it takes, he's going to say, if this is easy. take a drink of my Strava Craft coffee. All it takes is for cooler heads to prevail. For everyone involved to sacrifice a little bit of what they value the most. And by everyone involved, I mean, I'm talking players, managers, they might have to get rid of all the secondary personnel. Get your own damn bat. Clean up after your own damn self in the clubhouse. We can't have attendance in there. So there's going to be a lot of stuff like that, and they've got to stick to it, and they've got to commit. They all have to commit. And that is why I'm so torn as I read through these things, because the solution is both so obvious and to me so difficult to attain. If I believe you could get 100% buy-in from players, and if I believe that the owners would treat this in a way that won't make the situation worse, because I've heard some people say it this way, they say to me, Drew, that canceling the season is the absolute worst thing that could happen. That's the worst way. At least give us some baseball. And if a handful of guys get sick and they can't play, and even if the Rockies can't have David Dahl and Scott Oberg, and other teams can't, the Angels can't have Mike Trout because he wants to be at the birth of his kid or whatever it is. Just if we have to be without some of the stars of the game, just give us some baseball, because canceling the whole thing would be worse. But what would be worse than that is bringing the season back, fumbling it, having to cancel again anyway, so only getting a couple of weeks of baseball or whatever it may be, maybe a month. And that deeper poisoning the relationship between the players and the owners, directly leading to a work stoppage in our near future, which might have been on the table anyway. Like, we were already saying there could be a strike at the next CBA because of how far apart the parties are on how the money in baseball is being spent, right? That was already a possibility. If you were to take the DraftKings sportsbook over-under on whether or not games would have been missed over the collective bargaining agreement, if you would have asked me that like the day before I had any idea about COVID, right, I would have taken the over. 0.5 games missed because of a work stoppage over the collective bargaining agreement. If you poorly handle now, not just people's contracts, not just how much minor leaguers are getting, not just how much young players are paid versus what veterans can take home, and some of the more ridiculous things that are built into some of these contracts, not just the fact that the owners still won't open up their books. You throw on top of it, well, now we don't trust you because you put us into an unsafe environment. We'll see. Maybe not, but that's and if you're saying, hey, look, dude, it's not going to be unsafe. They'll be fine. If you're in that camp, James, I hear you. Test players before games, mandatory. Again, there's a way to do this. There's 100%. If everybody gets tested regularly, everyone goes straight home after games. If people are smart about it, all the stuff we know, washing it. Yeah. The problem is it only takes a couple of people not doing that, and these rules are nearly unenforceable. These are all self-enforced rules. And that's one other point that I wanted to make, though I did bring up DraftKings just a moment ago. And so I should probably mention, by the way, that we are super stoked that they are our newest sponsor and that legal sports betting is back in Colorado. You don't have to worry about them like you might some other offshore operation gambling sites. DraftKings is a legitimate sports book based right here in the U.S. You can be confident that your funds are secure. You can bet from wherever, whenever. There's all kinds of stuff going on right now that you can bet on. Certainly KBO, we've got DNVR bets keeping you up to date on everything going on there. There's been some NASCAR, I know, has been, you can bet on that. UFC. I want to get marble racing on there. I am absolutely into the marble racing. So I got to talk to our guys about that. We're going to have some exclusive. There's a lot of or original, I should say, stuff on the DNVR side that we've come up with, Broncos related things. And I think we're going to get some Rockies related ones in there very, very soon. Who do you think is going to hit more home runs between player X and Y? Who stuff like that, especially because we aren't going to know exactly what the season's going to look like, but you can at least say more home runs, more RBI, more strikeouts between, I don't know, Gray and Marquez, right? That could be a great one. Who do you think is going to get more strikeouts between those two? We'll have bets like that up there on the DraftKings Sportsbook app. So download it now and use code DNVR when you sign up. For limited time, all new users get a sign-up bonus of up to $1,000. That's right. DraftKings Sportsbook has that sign-up bonus up to $1,000. If you enter that code DNVR, you'll get that sign-up bonus only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older, Colorado only. Bonus comprised of a first deposit bonus and a first bet match, each up to $500. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700. So, one of the things that I wanted to mention with regards to this conversation that we were having about the rules or the guidelines and how enforceable they are, I feel like there needs to be a sort of reframing, there seems to be this strange conversation going on about whether or not the guidelines that have been put forth are enforceable. And I would like to state as plainly as I can, and I'm obviously no expert, and it is what it is, but that's not the point. The point is not get away with what you can. No one can stop me from spitting. No one can stop me from having sunflower seeds. No one can tell me I have to do X, Y, Z. That's really not the point. The framing is not to see these rules or guidelines as, if you don't do these things, you'll get in trouble. And if you do these things, you'll get in trouble. Trouble has nothing to do with it. Not about trouble. Like I said, there should be some consequences for some of them if you break quarantine. And if you're going to be in these places, I saw somebody say the other day, I can't remember who, it was just kind of retweeted into my timeline, something about how Little League Baseball is coming back like a month or several weeks before Major League Baseball, and what a ridiculous situation and how embarrassing that is for MLB. And that's just absurd. You don't have 15,000 people at your kid's Little League game, and children don't need spring training. That's not how it works. That's insane. However, it still needs to be the case that some of the rules need to try to be enforced, but how it should be seen is not, if I do all of these things, I won't get in trouble, but how are they going to catch me anyway? It's the more of these things you can successfully do, the safer you and everyone around you will be. And if you don't even want to view it in terms of safe or not, view it this way. It's as simple as this. This is the fact of the matter. And recognize that every single one of these reopenings has been contingent. When the governor of Colorado, and again, I'm not getting into a political debate, when the governor of Colorado and the commissioner of Major League Baseball agreed that baseball could return in the state, it wasn't okay, go do baseball however you want. It was, if these rules are followed, you can have baseball. Now, a lot of people have pointed out these rules may not be able to be followed. The natural result of that is, if enough of them aren't, we don't get baseball. It's that simple. So people need to stop viewing the no spitting, no shower. Like, some of the stuff, yes, needs to be worked out so it's a little bit more feasible for players. These things need to be understood in context. We're not dragging someone off. We're not taking the shortstop off the field if he forgets for a moment and spits. We're not going to suspend you or drag you out of the game or any of that stuff. Someone might, after the game, pull you aside and go, hey, keep an eye on that. There's different gradients here. You need to use your brain at all levels of this. It needs to be super nuanced. And that's, again, part of my worry. The more nuanced things get, the more people tend to adopt the attitude of, you can't tell me what to do, as opposed to, these are the things that need to be done to make sure baseball can continue to happen. That's as simple as I can put it. The more of these things you do right, the better an opportunity you have for the baseball season to continue uninterrupted. If you can't stop yourself from spitting, try to be vigilant about not drinking too much water or Gatorade or no chew or sunflower seeds, if that's a thing you're normally into, or really be vigilant about the fist bumps and the, not touching people. Whatever it may be, the trick isn't how much of this can I get away with? It's how much can I reasonably do to do my part? And if people view it that way, we can have baseball. We get to have baseball if people view it like that. But if they don't, we can't. Just can't have it. I do think people are starting to realize that more and more. But I think that's the key changeover that has to happen. The players there was a minor league coach who came out and said something like, I can't, no spitting. What are you talking about? How are you going to enforce that? Again, they're not. They can't. You have to enforce it. Every single person has to enforce it themselves. And if they don't, or if enough people don't, it will get shut down again. And regardless of, again, your view of the outside, the bigger picture of things, of there being another shutdown after another reopening, forget all of that. Just in the context of baseball, that would be an absolute nightmare scenario for the upcoming collective bargaining agreement, because now you don't just have all of the anger that was already there, but you add this to it. So we will obviously all keep our eyes and ears open. The general thrust, I think, of my piece this morning was, let's let cooler heads prevail. Let's let the people who are trying to be proactive and productive solve the issue. Blake Snell, go ahead and take a seat. Anyone else who wants to come out and throw fire right now, it's just not the time for it. It's just, and I understand passionately defending yourself. And, if you're a player and you're a big member of the players union, defending your group. And I understand the owners doing the same. And I understand fans doing the same. But right now, and I've been, I've done it as well, because I've had issues with these owners in the past. And so you start throwing fire, because I did it earlier in this podcast. I was talking about Rob Manfred's judgment. I think that's a fair critique. But everyone's got to come together to make this thing work. And these are two parties that are very far apart. So the cooler, like really the adults in the room need to stand up, quiet everybody else down in their own corners, and insist on doing this right. Because there is a worse case scenario than having no baseball this year. And that's having no baseball this year and next year, which is a distinct possibility. So something to keep in mind. But if they do it right, and I'll be there, and that's one of the things that's been interesting. I'll just say on a personal note before moving on and jumping into some on-field stuff, talk about the draft a little bit. I've had some people, wonder where I'm at with all of this. in terms of how much do I really want baseball to come back? And of course I do. Of course, anyone who knows me even a little bit knows I'd love to be watching baseball right now. And it'll really, really suck in a lot of ways to just not have a season, to have one just blanked out. And Cal, I have no idea. Questions like that. How would draft position be determined next year if there was no I don't know, right? It opens up all kinds of weird and interesting questions. There's actually a way in which it's almost, you could argue, a godsend for the Rockies, especially those who believed the Rockies were going nowhere this season. If you believed that the Rockies were stuck and it just isn't going to work out for them, because particularly of the players on the roster who are taking up a big amount of money, so you can't cut them, but those spots, they've just been bad. Well, a lot of those guys are either coming off the books or becoming much less expensive after this year. And so the worry was, right, the Rockies are going to be bad for one more year and Nolan will be gone. There's nothing you can do about it. Well, Nolan's going to be there. And, after the year, if there's no more Brian Shaw, Wade Davis, Desmond's getting paid now like $5 million as opposed to the 15 or what and 20 that it's been before. All of that stuff sort of dramatically alters the situation. And the Rockies could, without having lost any game, right? If there's no season, the Rockies could actually dramatically change their team before ever retaking the field with Nolan Arenado. And if the nature of his concern really was, you didn't get me enough reinforcements, and if Jeff Bridic's contingency really is due to the limitations put on me by ownership or just how I've spent my resources, whatever it is, whatever the reason, I had no more resources to spend and I couldn't swing the trades that would have even made you happy or whatever. Well, he'll have flexibility and resources that he didn't have before. And so, of course, some people have negative 12,000 faith in Jeff Bridich, and so they have no belief that he would go out there and make moves that would appease Nolan Arenado, but there would at least be the opportunity to do so. There would at least be a lot more money for him to spend, where last year there just really wasn't. Would he spend it wisely? We'll find out. But having that sort of buffer of, the Rockies didn't have a terrible 2020 because they didn't have a 2020. So you're still looking at a team that has 2 years of good, this core, 2 years of good and 1 year of bad on record and 1 year of not, right? And so in that situation, you make enough changes to the roster. If Nolan likes them, he's going to at least want to hit the field in 2021 to see what you got. Now, if those moves were good, if you've moved out Shaw, McGee, and Davis for 3 quality relievers, wherever they came from, inside your system, trade, free agency, whatever, you move those guys out, you replace them with some quality relievers, you maybe get one additional starter in here, you hit the ground running in 2021, and you're good. You have dramatically increased your chances of keeping Nolan Arenado, if that's your goal. For some people, that's not even necessarily the goal, right? Because you'll only have that 1 year. He'll have that year to decide. If at the end of the year he leaves, you don't have to pay him. If you get the sense he's going to leave, you can try to trade him in 2021. It gets much, much smaller. But if you're having an amazing first half of the season, you can kind of roll your dice that way and say, look, man, we did what you said. We went out and got the guys. Now we're competing. So if you leave, it's really going to look on you. It'll be interesting to see if they can pull that off. Obviously, if they play games, they've got to prove a little something to him during those games that they play this year. And that may be a bit more difficult to do. But, depending on how you're feeling about the team. So it's really interesting that in that way, it kind of helps the Rockies out. Even playing half a season helps the Rockies out in the whole Nolan Arenado fiasco, whatever you want to call it, situation, the drama, the deal with Nolan. It gives the Rockies a ton actually of leverage back. And they can even still trade him if they decide that that's what they want to do, that they'd get a ton out of him, and they'd be able to do that in an offseason where they're going to have all these resources, and you can build around Trevor Story, John Gray, David Dahl, and Charlie Blackmon, who's almost certainly going to continue to be on the team as long as there's going to be DH and stuff. But even that, even if they're going to have the DH, let's say they get back out there on the field in a month and a half, and with the DH, the Rockies are essentially doing this, which is both what I think they will do and what they should do, which is Charlie is your DH most of the time, with Daniel Murphy as your DH a third or a fourth of the time. When Charlie Blackmon is your DH, Sam Hilliard can start in center field, and you can have Dahl or Tapia in the corners, however you most feel comfortable. You can also leave Dahl alone if you like him in center, and just have Hilliard in right, where he's a bit more naturally fit. He's got that cannon of an arm, and have Tapia out there in left. I do think that that's your best outfield. If you're concerned about the wear and tear on David Dahl, you can put Hilliard in center when he's out there, and Blackmon is your DH, which I think would be my that's sort of your standard lineup right there, right? Hilliard in center, Blackmon at DH, Dahl in right, I guess, yeah, and Tapia in left, with Desmond coming off the bench. If there's a left-handed pitcher on the mound, I like having Desmond in at DH, and Garrett Hampson as, again, if you're trying to keep wear and tear off of David Dahl, center field. Then, on the other groupings of time, when you're just trying to keep guys in there and keep them moving, depending on how particularly Hampson and Rogers are playing, if Brendan Rodgers gets hot and Hilliard isn't, or that would be the main situation. If Hilliard's, okay, he's striking out a little bit much, nowhere near as hot as he was in that September. He's still getting used to the bigs, but Rogers and or Hampson's really coming on. Then you start going a little bit more to Daniel Murphy is the DH. McMahon slides over to first base, and either Hampson or Rogers plays second. So I've laid all that out for you. Let's assume that the first version of this works, that the best case scenario of this works, which is that you've kept Charlie Blackmon, who's one of the 20 best hitters in baseball, in your lineup, and you'd have allowed him to focus a lot more on offense and stay completely fresh. With him being a little bit older and a couple of issues, not really a ton of injury issues over the years, but he's just getting slower, aren't we all? So Charlie's raking out of the DH spot because he's a great hitter, and now he's much more focused on it than he ever has been before. I know Charlie has expressed, by the way, a lack of interest in doing that, and I 100% appreciate that. And he'd still get out there in the field, and he would still need to. And it may even be something where it's every third day, and you can again do this with Daniel Murphy. But your scenario here is basically this. If Sam Hilliard or Brendan Rodgers or Garrett Hampson or two of the three of those players play well, whatever your definition of play well is, Nolan's going to look at this and go, well, now this is interesting. Let's say it's Hilliard and Rodgers. Let's take the ceiling of this. Of course, I'm laying out a bit of a best case scenario here, but this is by no means absurd. Hilliard and Rogers defensively can play center field and second base at the major league level at an above average yesterday, months ago, years ago, probably. They're good to go from a defensive standpoint. Let's assume they both start to reach what their offensive profiles have shown us so far. With Hilliard, that's a guy who's going to hit 30 home runs and strike out 190 to 200 times and steal 20 bases. With Rogers, it's also a guy who's going to hit 30 home runs, not strike out quite as much, probably hit 270 to 280, draw a decent number of walks, play a good second base. Both of those guys will be still, I think, technically rookies. Has Rogers outgrown it? They're very young in their first full year in the big leagues. And now Nolan's seeing, well, there's this great hitter right next to me who's now going to be able to age gracefully because we've got the DH in the NL. Now, I see these young guys coming along, and they're really starting to rake. Oh, yeah, and there's a generational shortstop right next to me. What's the missing piece? Pitch. Of course. He said it like it was easy. Pitch good. That team pitches well, and I think Nolan immediately reassesses the whole thing. I think something as simple as the addition of the DH to the dynamics of the current team that he is on could reevaluate, especially knowing that this is going to be an inevitability. This is not a one-time thing. The universal DH is coming. It's going to be here. The National League will have a designated hitter. And that's great news for the Rockies. It's great news for Charlie Blackmon, and maybe great news for Nolan Arenado. So, Cal, you're absolutely 100% right. That brings us to the following question. Who are the pitchers? I'll tell you one thing all the pitchers are doing right now. They're all playing WGT golf. I'm almost sure they are. I can't guarantee you that. They're playing some form of golf, and it would not surprise me if Kyle Freeland is not just one of the best actual golfers of any non-pro golfer in the world, but if he was great at WGT. You can download it from DNVR Golf right now, totally for free on your phone, on your laptop, on your PC, whatever you got going on. It's a great, super fun game, loved by over 20 million players around the world. You can play closest to the hole or full stroke play on world-famous golf courses, including Pebble Beach, Bethpage Black, St. Andrews, and more. You get the total Top Golf experience. You can play it super hardcore. You can play it relaxed like I do. You can join us for tournaments just about every weekend. Join that DNVR Country Club. It's super cool hanging out with everybody. Again, that's dnvrgolf.com. So, Cal, yes, the answer to your question, how the pitchers line up here, right? So you've got Gray, Marquez, and Freeland. Those guys are going to be there. That's your top three, no questions asked. Until Freeland, if he really continues to struggle again this year, you can start to reevaluate that at some point. But for right now, you have to have him in there at third. I think, well, let me give you mine. Well, and I actually don't know that mine is too far off of where the Rockies are at right now. My number 4 is Antonio Senzatella. And he's one of the guys I was already most interested in watching him at spring training, most curious about the impact he was going to have on the season. And now I'm really interested to see how he has handled this stoppage and literally what he looks like when he gets back out there. Because for those of you that weren't following us at the time, the big story of spring training was that Antonio Senzatella completely transformed his body. I mean, he looked like a totally new guy. He was in extraordinary condition. And he talked to us about having to cut stuff out of his diet, not being allowed to eat some of his favorite meals that his wife would cook that were just made of carbs and stuff. Candy. He was a big candy guy. And I've been talking for years, literal years, about Antonio Senzatella's the gap between Antonio Senzatella's sort of natural ability and potential and where he's been able to take it, but also in recognizing how young he is and how much was thrown at him so early in his career and in his life. Being a 10-game winner, whatever, that may not mean anything to Manny Randala, but it meant a lot to Antonio Senzatella at 22 years old. He's pitched in the postseason and pitched well. And when you look at his career, it's this sort of baffling display of being ironically super reliable or super not, which doesn't make any sense, right? Like, typically when a guy's inconsistent, it's like the next guy we're going to talk about. Oh, and even I wouldn't even throw that later. Jeff Hoffman at the major leagues has just been bad at this point, right? Like in 2017, he was good at the major leagues, but he hasn't been up and down since then. He's been down. He's just been down. Antonio Senzatella has this uncanny knack of being able to show up at the ballpark, get rocked for 7 or 8 runs in 5 innings, come back the next time out, throw a quality start, time after that, quality start, time after that, a little bit worse than a quality start, but somehow figures out to win the game, time after that, rocked. Loses the game all by himself. And then he gets right back to throwing you quality starts. And it's the reason why he's amassed, again, apologies to Manny, so many wins in his career. Despite the fact that every time he gets blown up, he destroys his ERA and his ERA plus and stuff like that. And he doesn't have overwhelming strikeout stuff or great strikeout to walk numbers. The peripherals, as we sort of collectively call all those things, not great for Antonio Senzatella. But he has maybe the single most important element for any pitcher, and the top 3 are all this one thing if you happen to be a Colorado Rockies pitcher. He's mentally tough, dude. Antonio Senzatella is not scared of you. Ryan Braun or Christian Yelich or Aaron, like he might not be good that day. That's the thing is, like, when Senza's bad, it's because he's bad. When Jeff Hoffman's bad, it's because he beats himself. Jeff Hoffman has at every level. He's got a better fastball. He's got a better curveball. He's got a better changeup. Man, no, he does. He has a better change. He doesn't have a good changeup. Neither one of them have a great changeup. Jeff Hoffman's slider is non-existent, and I think he maybe even has put it away. But between those two guys, if a scout looked at those two guys throwing a bullpen, 100 out of 100 of them would take Jeff Hoffman. But if a coach watched Antonio Senzatella pitch in the NLDS and watched Jeff Hoffman pitch literally any time in the major leagues in the last 2 years, 100 out of 100 of them, 99 out of 100. Some people can't get over a 98-mile-an-hour fastball. They're going to take Senzatella. And then he showed up, and then this happened, Cal, I'm telling you, team, chat, fam, everybody out there, he showed up at spring training this year with more zip on the fastball, which already, he has a great fastball. It doesn't have the velo that some other people do, but the fastball is what Senzatella's gotten by on. And all of a sudden, his curveball, or it was more of a slurve he was throwing, had depth and movement to it that was starting to emerge at the end of last year, but it was there. He looked like a whole new man on the mound, in the clubhouse. His pitches were moving differently, and he was blowing guys away. And remember, Antonio Senzatella who's got 3 years of big league experience and, as I think I've mentioned once or twice, has pitched in the NLDS. He's 25 years old. My early pick for surprise of the season or boon of the season, if the Rockies end up doing special things, not just the way I think they can typically surprise people, because people don't believe in the Rockies, and I think Freeland is good, and I don't think Wade Davis will be a disaster, and I think that'll keep them in the mix, right? But if they're going to be more than in the mix, if the Rockies, whatever the season looks like, are to take off in a way, and you're looking for, like, why? What happened? What did they not have? Or what did they get that they didn't have before? They didn't make any acquisitions, right? That's the thing. They didn't make any acquisitions. Antonio Senzatella. If he shows up to spring training again, now if he's maintained during this lockdown, because so much of it is about what he's, his workout regimen, what he's not putting in his body anymore. So if he's fallen back into bad habits, that's real rough for the Rockies, because they could really use that fourth starter. And I don't know, how important the fifth starters are going to be if it's going to be a shortened season. That'll be really interesting to see how that works out. But that, you're right, does lead us to the question, what does Hoffman need to turn it around? I gave you the answer in the Antonio Senzatella conversation. He needs what Senzatella has. He needs to listen to his coaches. One thing he's really, really started doing at the end of last season, letting them adjust his mechanics just a little bit. He needs to listen to the people around him who are trying to craft him into not just a thrower, but a pitcher. He needs to approach the game mentally as well as he does physically, because Jeff Hoffman's a hard worker. And he's not like an idiot or anything like that. He's got to get it together upstairs in terms of confidence and lack of fear. And you can't let failure destroy you out there. John Gray has had to learn that lesson the hard way. He just had more success early on. He's been able to bounce back, and it's something he's still struggled with. But that's one of the reasons why I'm so confident in Antonio Senzatella. That guy has taken lumps, man. He has had some ugly performances, and a lot of times because he's been the fourth or fifth starter, he's been out there on days where the team's down and the bullpen's tired. And so, yeah, you've given up 6 runs in the first 4 innings, but you've only thrown 60 pitches. So you're going back out there, kid. Eat it. Wear it. Senzatella has worn it and still somehow shows up on the other side of it, and he'll throw you the occasional gem in addition to those quality starts that he'll string together. And Hoffman just hasn't shown an ability to do that. He gives up a couple runs in the first inning. He totally implodes. He won't get through the fourth or the fifth or the sixth and allow Bud Black to say, hey, look, we lost today, but I was able to give everybody in the bullpen a rest. It was a tough matchup from the beginning. Thanks for the innings. And I know that if I send you back out there next time, there's a decent chance you've put this one completely in the rearview mirror. That's what Senzatella does. Short memory. Forget it. You can't do anything about the last start. Jeff Hoffman, if he got blasted in his last start, he's going to come out and try to throw 101 miles an hour this time. And because he wants to succeed and he wants to be good. And I think he's also gotten very frustrated in his career at the failures at the big league level. But if he can turn it right, yeah, he can be that dude. From a stuff standpoint, Jeff Hoffman should be a very good number 3 pitcher in Major League Baseball right now. The only reason he's not is because he hasn't put it together up here. And if he does, and he's young, man. He's not super young, but I think he's still 25, 26 years old. There's still a chance. So, I think you look at a guy like that for your 5th spot. It really depends on how you want to use your 5th rotation spot strategically, this upcoming season, I feel, because it's like, I wouldn't go with a pitcher like Jeff Hoffman, where in a longer season, you accept some of those bad losses if you think you're building toward a guy who could lock in at any minute and then go on a run. Hoffman's your best chance of doing that with Lambert right behind him, and Lambert I might have a bit more confidence in right now. But with a shorter season, with needing your fifth rotation guy presumably less often, and dipping into your bullpen depth, again, presumably a little bit less often, I'd prefer to have a guy probably like Chichi Gonzalez in that fifth rotation spot. Like, go out, be solid, keep us in it. Let's see what happens. If it starts to go sideways, presumably our bullpen is well rested for those games, from not having to use them quite as much, or from having a more available taxi squad of relievers even, because the Rockies have a lot of relievers who are sort of on that cusp. And it'll be interesting to see how those rules end up working out too. But, as we were talking about it going into the spring training, the big battles, right, were Jake McGee and Brian Shaw going to keep their spots going into the season? If neither one of those guys was going to be cut, and I think there was a chance that one of them was, and now I think there's a higher chance that one of them is, and I was leaning towards Shaw, and McGee was having a slightly better spring training. But if your bullpen is Oberg Davis, Diaz Estevez, James Pazos, I think he's going to be there. If you didn't read the article I wrote during spring training, James Pazos is another guy I would put into that category where people are going, what did the Rockies even get? Why are they, if they're playing better, like how are they playing so much better even though they didn't make an acquisition? James Pazos, in my mind, really counts as an acquisition for this team. His numbers are incredible. The Phillies tried to ruin him. He appeared very unruined at spring training this season. He went like 9 innings, I think, before he gave up a base runner. He's exactly the lefty that the Rockies need. James Pazos is your Antonio Senzatella of the bullpen. But so you've got those 5 guys. And then if you've got Shaw McGee, that only leaves you with one open spot in your bullpen for a very intriguing collection of young players, or at least younger players than Shaw McGee, who were making the case, really making the case. Tyler Kinley, I think, was the guy who was going to win that spot if the Rockies decided not to go with a long reliever. I also saw a scenario where whoever lost out between Jeff Hoffman and Chichi Gonzalez would end up as the long reliever. And Cal, to answer that question from earlier, is Jeff Hoffman being misused as implied on a Purple Row article from last summer? Does he go superstar if in a different club with a different pitching philosophy? I don't think it has anything to do with other clubs' pitching philosophies. I don't think that the Rockies, I guess I'm not sure what they think that the Rockies pitching philosophy is, but it's different for every pitcher. And I actually think quite the opposite. That, and I didn't even see the question until now, and you heard me saying earlier that one of the biggest problems is he hasn't really listened to his coaches much, and so it's not their philosophy. Their philosophy could or could not be an issue, but it's not an issue for Jeff Hoffman, who's mostly been pitching on his own damn philosophy, and you've seen the results thus far. And so, no, do I think that he's the type of pitcher who, if you moved him to an environment that was less chaotic, could flourish? Yeah, like a Drew Pomeranz type, absolutely. There are some guys who just don't do well with that level of chaos. And I'll tell you this, and I don't mean to pick on the guy, because I've said this before, people have even come after me like, why are you so defensive of Jeff Hoffman? I do think he's got what it takes to turn it around, and generally I believe in people. But he, after a really bad start, had one of the most unacceptable post-game press conferences I've ever seen in person. And no one, I've never been around guys who've like gone off and flown off the handle and sworn and throw things and done any of that. So, some of those ones from back in the day that I've seen on TV, nothing like that. But no and yes for every answer, and looking at us with disdain when you gave up 7 runs in the first inning. No, that's not acceptable, Jeff Hoffman. And beyond, who cares? I don't care that I didn't have any quotes to write. I don't usually write the starting pitcher's quotes anyway. But what it showed me was that he was still bubbling. He hadn't shaken a start that now think about this. He got blown up in the first inning. I believe he gave up 7 runs in the first inning and got pulled either after 1 or 2, right? The rest of the baseball game was played because that's what we do at this level. And the Rockies lost, of course. I believe that was the day Dom Nunez made his major league debut and hit a home run. I think the Rockies lost like 7-2. But another 2 or 3 hours had passed between the start and his post-game press conference. And he was visibly irate. Now, look, there's a fine line between having passion for the game and caring about your performance and saying and telling yourself what I just did was unacceptable and I'm going to stew in it for the rest of the night. Okay, on some level, I can respect that. On a human level, I could never argue that I would be any different. But the question has been asked, what do you do to become a better baseball player? There is no ballpark in which doing that to yourself is going to make you a better pitcher. You might get away with it more. In fact, you will get away with it more in San Diego and Los Angeles and at Citi Field in New York and some of these other places that are more favorable to pitchers, and in Oakland. In Colorado, you will not. With that attitude, you will get eaten up, you will get spit out, you will get destroyed. And I saw a marked change. The next time he got sent down to AAA, I think 12 minutes after that press conference ended, you could hear Bud Black down the hallway almost. And we didn't see him again for 3 or 4 weeks. And he showed back up and he looked like a different guy. Now, you can fool some people some of the time. I fancy myself a decent observer of these kinds of things. Here's the thing. I can't say what Jeff Hoffman needs is a change of attitude and then he could be a great pitcher. Then witness a little bit of a change of attitude and ignore it. Can't do that. That's not fair. So that's why I've said for years, the guy needs to put it together upstairs. Do I know that he has? No. He looked better this spring training. And he was in a much better, you've got to be in that mental space, dude. You cannot. The only player I've seen successfully get away, like Chatwood had that same thing after a really terrible start or after just a mediocre start. He just would go into his shell. And it's not about I realize I don't care if you're good to the media post game. I don't. I prefer it. It helps me do my job a little bit, but I'm going to do my job either way. I'm going to go. I'm going to comment on whatever you do, bud. What you say and do in your post game press conference doesn't matter to me, though. The more interesting, I guess, the better. Beyond that, don't care. So when it's super boring, yeah, maybe I take note of it. But I'm analyzing baseball players here. The only guy I've seen pull that off on any level is Jorge De La Rosa. And Jorge De La Rosa is just a unicorn. You can't, at this point, if you just do what Jorge De La Rosa did, yeah, every pitcher in the Rockies organization should figure out whatever it is that made Jorge De La Rosa work and do that. And I could not tell you. I've watched film. I've looked at stats. I've spoken to him on several occasions. I've spoken to people that covered him for longer than I did. And he could be like that after a bad start. Just deadpan, I don't know. I guess I not pitched good today. Well, shoot, right? The newspaper guys are going to need a little more than that. But he flushed it, man. John Gray has talked about literally flushing things after a bad inning. He will go down into the bathroom down there just behind the dugout and take out a piece of gum, chew it up, throw it in the toilet, and flush it. Literally just get okay, it's up. Not even mad anymore. Not even mad. And I think John's figured it out. I think Kyle has really figured it out. Marquez hasn't really had this issue. Marquez has had very few times where he's even needed to be angry. He's too stupid, naturally talented. All right, this has been a pretty fun and good talk today. And so I think what I will do is leave the prospect draft conversation for next time so we can start getting Patrick Lyons in on these. Should be a lot of fun. I also think we're going to do a couple more sims this next week on Tuesday and Thursday in the sort of late afternoon, early evening time. We're going to be simming some classic Rockies versus modern Rockies. And I think we're going to do a home run derby for you of the greatest Rockies power hitters of all time. We'll need to narrow it down to 8. So we need your pool, your 8 players. Remember, I mean, you've got Helton, Walker, Galarraga, Bichette, Troy Tulowitzki, Trevor Story, Nolan Arenado. A long list of Rockies power hitters to get into this thing. We need to decide on 8. Run the sim. Patrick and I will be on play-by-play and commentary. Would love to see all of you around while we're doing that. Remember, if you want to see those, subscribe to the Twitch channel. You don't even actually have to subscribe to the Twitch channel. If you want to swing by, like, you can watch anything on Twitch. You don't have to be a member or anything like that. Just swing by twitch.tv/DNVR Sports. You'll find us there having fun, doing the thing on Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons, getting some version of baseball in. So thank you all for hanging out. Hopefully you're following on all the social media. You're subscribing to the DNVR.com. You're swinging by our merch store to get a cool shirt or hat or something like, or mask. We've got DNVR masks now, which I'm very excited for the arrival of mine. I hope it gets here soon. Otherwise, yeah, thank you all for listening in. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and feelings and asking questions. Please continue to do so. Let me know where you're at, and I appreciate all of you sticking with me as a guy who just loves baseball and video games, tries to work through, some real life questions here on the podcast, and I hope I've done well to take all perspectives and all viewpoints into consideration, and to be completely as earnest and open and honest with all of you as I can be. And I hope anyone who's had a different viewpoint feels as though they've been heard and that their viewpoint has been well articulated. And if not, please contact me, and I will do my best to make sure to correct that. So, and thank you, Cal. I will do my best to keep kicking butt, and we can keep that totally on record. I'm a huge Final Fantasy fan. I loved the remake. My brother and I do a podcast on the Final Fantasy franchise that we're looking at maybe even making available through the DNVR gaming network, because my boss is really, really cool. So thanks. That's all I got. No one likes to end on that message. Your boss is cool, man. Come on. But just, I got lucky. So thank you all so much for hanging out, for listening, and just for continuing to be absolutely awesome. I promise you, I will continue to be absolutely Drew Creasman. And until next time, I will see you at the ballpark.